In the summer of 1969, deep inside a locked engineering garage at General Motors, a group of Chevrolet engineers stood around an engine that sounded completely wrong. It idled like a race car, sharp, violent, angry. The entire building shook every time the throttle cracked open. Tools rattled on workbenches. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with every blip of the accelerator. One engineer reportedly looked over at the dyno operator and said, "If this thing ever gets loose on the street, we're dead." And the crazy part? Most people have never even heard of it. Not the LS6, not the 454, not the famous Hemi killers everybody talks about. This was something different, something experimental. An engine so extreme that even GM's own engineers started questioning whether they had gone too far. This wasn't about selling cars to families. This wasn't about profit margins or quarterly reports. This was about pushing the absolute mechanical limits of what an internal combustion engine could do with 1960s technology. This was the Chevrolet ZL1 427, the forgotten all-aluminum monster that scared the people who built it. And what happened next changed everything. By the late 1960s, America was drunk on horsepower. Ford had the 427 side oiler tearing up drag strips from California to New York. Chrysler unleashed the legendary 426 Hemi, an engine so dominant that NASCAR tried banning it. Pontiac was building screaming Ram air motors that turned GTOs into street terrors. Every weekend, drag strips across the country turned into battlefields, quarter-mile wars, tire smoke hanging in the air like fog, broken transmissions, shredded clutches, entire reputations built or destroyed in less than 12 seconds. But inside GM, there was a problem. Officially, General Motors had banned factory racing back in 1963. Corporate executives were terrified of bad publicity, rising insurance costs, and government pressure over safety. The bodies were piling up. Young men were dying in high-speed crashes. Congressional hearings were becoming more frequent. Publicly, GM acted like racing wasn't part of the business anymore. Press releases emphasized family values, safety features, and responsible engineering. Privately, they never stopped. Behind closed doors, engineers at Chevrolet Engineering and the COPO program were still building monsters. They worked late nights. They ran unauthorized dyno tests. They communicated through unofficial channels with dealers who understood what was really happening, and they were getting ambitious. Very ambitious. The foundation of the ZL1 started with the already terrifying L88 427. Now the L88 alone was insane. It used a 4.25-inch bore and a 3.76-inch stroke for 427 cubic inches of displacement. Compression ratio? A brutal 12.51. Official horsepower rating? 430 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, which was complete nonsense. Real output was closer to 500 horsepower in street trim and well beyond that in race configuration. Some dyno sheets from private testing facilities suggested numbers approaching 560 horsepower with the right exhaust and tuning. Chevrolet intentionally underrated it because insurance companies were already panicking over muscle cars. Actuaries were running the numbers and realizing that 20-year-olds with 500 horsepower machines represented catastrophic financial risk. The less attention from corporate America and government regulators, the better. But even the L88 wasn't enough for some engineers. They wanted lighter, faster, more extreme. They wanted something that could dominate not just street racing, but organized drag racing competition. They wanted an engine that would make Ford and Chrysler engineers lose sleep at night. So they took the cast iron Mark IV big block and replaced the entire block with aluminum. Not aluminum heads, not aluminum intake manifolds, the entire block. Back then, that was almost unheard of for a massive American V8. Aluminum was exotic. It was expensive. It was temperamental. The casting process required precision that most foundries couldn't achieve consistently. But the result was the ZL1, an all-aluminum 427 that weighed nearly 100 pounds less than an iron big block. Think about that for a second. Same displacement, same brutal power, same external dimensions. But suddenly the front end of the car felt lighter, sharper, more nimble, more dangerous. Weight distribution shifted rearward. Turn-in response improved. And the power-to-weight ratio entered territory that most production cars wouldn't see for another 30 years. And under full throttle, this thing was a complete animal. The ZL1 retained the massive 4.25-inch bore and 3.76-inch stroke of the L88, but internally, it was a completely different beast. Forged steel crankshaft built to withstand punishment that would snap lesser components. 4-bolt mains anchoring everything with brutal strength. High-flow rectangular port heads that moved air like industrial ventilation systems. Solid lifter camshaft with aggressive duration and lift profiles. Huge Holley 4-barrel carburetor that could flow enough air to feed a small aircraft engine. In race trim, compression climbed above 12:1. Some racers pushed it even higher, flirting with ratios that demanded racing fuel just to prevent catastrophic detonation. Open headers transformed the exhaust note into pure violence. The sound wasn't just loud, it was threatening. It made your chest compress. It set off car alarms 3 blocks away. Dyno numbers from insiders suggested some race-prepped ZL1s pushed over 550 horsepower naturally aspirated. In 1969, most people don't realize how insane that was. A modern Dodge Hellcat makes more power, sure, but it does it with fuel injection, computers, superchargers, knock sensors, variable valve timing, and decades of engineering evolution. The ZL1 did it with raw compression, airflow, cam timing, and sheer mechanical aggression. No traction control to save you when the rear tires broke loose. No ABS when you panicked and locked everything up at 70 miles per hour. No stability management to prevent the back end from swapping sides mid-corner. Just engine, just driver, just physics. And then the real nightmare started. Because the engine was too much. At high RPM, oil temperatures skyrocketed past safe operating limits. Mechanics found bearing wear after hard racing sessions that looked catastrophic. One drag racing crew reportedly pulled apart a ZL1 after a weekend run and found metallic glitter filling the oil pan like silver paint. Tiny particles of bearing material suspended in oil that had turned nearly black from heat and stress. Why? Because at over 7,000 RPM, the massive reciprocating loads punished the bottom end relentlessly. Pistons weighing nearly a pound each changed direction thousands of times per minute. Connecting rods stretched and compressed under forces that would bend rebar. Even though the engine used a strengthened oiling system with improved pump capacity and larger passages, sustained drag strip launches and high-speed pulls could still starve critical areas momentarily. Oil pressure would spike, then drop, then spike again. Bearings overheated. Crank journals suffered microscopic scoring that accumulated over time. Valve springs fatigued rapidly from the aggressive solid lifter setup, sometimes breaking after just a few hard passes. Retainers cracked. Push rods bent if valve float occurred at high RPM. The engine demanded constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant respect, and fuel consumption? Absolutely ridiculous. A hard-driven ZL1 could drain fuel at rates approaching race car territory. Under wide-open throttle, fuel economy dropped into the single digits. Some owners joked that the gas gauge moved faster than the speedometer. Long-distance cruising was painful. Highway trips required planning around gas stations like a military supply operation. One owner reportedly calculated that his ZL1 Camaro achieved less than 4 miles per gallon during aggressive driving. But nobody cared, because when it worked, it was terrifyingly fast. In period testing, ZL1-powered Camaros were capable of quarter-mile times deep into the 11-second range straight from the dealership with minor tuning tweaks. Tire pressure adjustments, timing advance, jetting changes. Some properly prepared examples with slicks and race fuel dipped into the high 10s. A few legendary builds cracked into the 10-second barrier consistently. Trap speeds exceeded 125 miles per hour, numbers that represented genuine supercar performance. That was supercar territory decades before modern supercars existed. And remember, this was happening during the late 1960s when most sports cars struggled to break 15 seconds in the quarter mile. At the drag strip, the engine became almost mythical. Racers whispered about it in parking lots after events. Mechanics passed stories around like ghost tales told at midnight. Guys who had driven Hemis, guys who had built 427 Fords, guys who thought they had seen everything climbed out of ZL1 Camaros, shaking their heads in disbelief. One driver reportedly described the acceleration as getting rear-ended by a freight train while falling off a cliff. But there was one enormous problem: the price. The ZL1 option alone cost over $4,000 in 1969 money. That's more than many entire cars cost back then. A basic Volkswagen Beetle sold for under $2,000. A decent family sedan cost maybe $3,000. Add the ZL1 to a Camaro, and suddenly you were looking at a machine costing nearly twice the price of a standard muscle car. The total price could exceed $7,500, which was shocking money for a Chevrolet in 1969. Why so expensive? Because aluminum blocks were brutally difficult to manufacture at the time. The casting process had to be incredibly precise. Cylinder wall integrity was a constant concern because aluminum was softer than iron. Thermal expansion characteristics differed dramatically from cast iron. Engineers had to carefully manage tolerances because aluminum expanded far more under heat. Go too tight, and piston seized when the engine reached operating temperature. Go too loose, and compression leaked past the rings, killing power. And if the block casting had imperfections, porosity in the wrong places, inclusions in critical areas, cracks, catastrophic cracks that turned expensive engines into expensive scrap metal. Chevrolet reportedly lost significant money on many ZL1 engines because production complexity was so high. Reject rates were substantial. Quality control demanded levels of inspection that slowed everything down. This wasn't mass production anymore. This was borderline aerospace-level experimentation disguised as a muscle car engine. And that scared people inside GM. You can probably guess what happened next. But the truth is even crazier, because Chevrolet accidentally created a weapon for organized drag racing. Through the COPO system, Central Office Production Order, dealers could secretly order high-performance combinations that normal buyers couldn't access through regular channels. It was a backdoor, a loophole, a way for performance-minded dealers to get factory race cars without GM officially building factory race cars. One of the most famous dealers was Fred Gibb Chevrolet in La Harpe, Illinois. Fred Gibb knew exactly what the ZL1 was capable of. He understood the rules. He understood NHRA homologation requirements. He knew that getting 50 examples built would qualify the package for superstock competition. He ordered 50 ZL1 Camaros specifically to qualify the engine package for NHRA superstock competition. 50 cars. Each one essentially a barely disguised race car with a VIN number and minimal soundproofing. The cars arrived looking almost ordinary. Simple badges, minimal graphics, no giant spoilers screaming for attention, no bright colors advertising what lived under the hood. They looked like slightly upgraded Camaros. Nothing special, nothing threatening. But underneath? Pure insanity. The aluminum 427 transformed weight distribution. Front-end response improved dramatically compared to iron big blocks. Launches became violent enough to twist driveline components. Rear axles twisted under load. U-joints failed. Rear tires vaporized instantly under aggressive throttle input, leaving black stripes that lasted for months. And the NHRA noticed. Fast. At tracks across America, ZL1 Camaros started humiliating competitors. Their power-to-weight ratio was outrageous for the era. With proper slicks, race fuel, and tuning, they became monsters off the line. 60-foot times dropped into the 1.4-second range. Launches looked like explosions. The cars squatted, hooked, and disappeared down the track while competitors were still spinning. One heavily modified ZL1 Camaro reportedly ran quarter-mile passes in the low 10-second range at over 130 miles per hour. That kind of speed didn't just win races. It embarrassed entire manufacturers. And inside General Motors, executives became deeply uncomfortable. The late 1960s were already politically tense for the auto industry. Ralph Nader's safety campaigns had put manufacturers under intense scrutiny. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, had triggered investigations. Insurance companies were increasing premiums on muscle cars at alarming rates. Federal emissions regulations were looming like a storm cloud on the horizon. The Clean Air Act was coming. Everyone knew it. Now imagine executives discovering that their engineers had quietly built an all-aluminum racing engine capable of humiliating almost anything on the road. An engine that barely pretended to be street legal. An engine that ordinary people could theoretically buy. Suddenly, the ZL1 looked less like a halo product and more like a liability. And then came the insurance nightmare. Young drivers were wrapping muscle cars around telephone poles at horrifying rates. Insurance companies started identifying high-performance engine codes directly from VIN numbers. Premiums skyrocketed. In some states, Ensuring a top-tier muscle car became almost impossible for younger buyers. Monthly insurance payments sometimes exceeded car payments. The market was changing fast, and the ZL1 was simply too extreme for the world GM was entering. Production numbers remained tiny. Only 69 ZL1 Camaros were officially built in 1969, making them some of the rarest and most valuable muscle cars ever produced. A handful of Corvettes also received the engine, though exact numbers remain debated among historians. Some sources say 2. Others claim more, and despite all its brilliance, the engine's lifespan was brutally short. By the early 1970s, the muscle car era was collapsing. Emissions regulations strangled compression ratios. Leaded, high-octane fuel disappeared from pumps. Insurance costs crushed demand. The Clean Air Act forced manufacturers to rethink everything. High-compression monsters like the ZL1 simply couldn't survive. Compression ratios dropped from brutal 12.5.1 setups to tame, emissions-friendly configurations barely over 8.1. Horsepower numbers collapsed almost overnight. Engines that once made 500 horsepower suddenly struggled to advertise 270. The golden age was over, and the ZL1 faded into legend. But here's the part most people don't know. The ZL1 didn't just disappear because regulations changed. It disappeared because GM itself was nervous about what it represented. Think about it. An all-aluminum 427 producing race-level power during an era with primitive tires, weak brakes, flexible chassis designs, and virtually no electronic safety systems. These cars were already difficult to control with normal big blocks. Add 100 pounds less weight over the nose and even more horsepower, and suddenly, you had something genuinely dangerous in the wrong hands. This wasn't a refined sports car with balanced handling. It was a street-legal drag racer with license plates and a heater. Even experienced drivers struggled with them. Full throttle acceleration could overwhelm bias-ply tires instantly. Wheel spin turned into fishtailing. Rear axles snapped under shock loads. Clutches exploded into fragments. Some transmissions simply surrendered under repeated launches, shedding gear teeth like shrapnel. Mechanics learned quickly that drivetrain survival depended almost entirely on driver restraint. And restraint was not something muscle car buyers were famous for. Still, the legend kept growing. By the 1980s and 1990s, surviving ZL1 cars became collector gold. Stories spread through car shows and enthusiast magazines about secret horsepower figures and terrifying street races. Magazine writers called the engine Chevrolet's hidden nuclear weapon. Auction prices climbed into 6 figures, then 7. Today, authentic ZL1 Camaros regularly sell for enormous money. Some pristine examples have crossed well over $1 million at auction. Documented survivors with matching numbers and original components command prices that make financial advisors nervous. Not because they were perfect, but because they represented the absolute peak of American muscle car insanity. No computers, no compromises. Just engineers pushing mechanical limits until even they got nervous. And honestly, that's what makes the story so fascinating. Because the ZL1 wasn't merely powerful. Plenty of engines became powerful later. The real reason this engine became legendary was psychological. It crossed a line. It forced GM engineers and executives to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when horsepower outpaces responsibility? In many ways, the ZL1 was the final warning shot before the entire muscle car world collapsed under regulation, insurance pressure, and reality itself. And maybe that's why people still obsess over it today. Not because it was practical, not because it was safe, but because it represented a moment when American engineers stopped asking whether they should and only cared whether they could. The forgotten ZL1 didn't just scare competitors. It scared the people who built it. An all-aluminum 427 capable of over 550 horsepower in race trim, wrapped inside cars barely prepared to handle it. Tiny production numbers, brutal engineering, and a legacy that still echoes through muscle car culture more than 50 years later. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what you want to see next. Another forgotten racing engine, another muscle car rivalry, or another piece of automotive history that almost disappeared forever. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines that changed the car world forever.